now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other two books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. Konkret Comics has been doing some fantastic work over the past couple of years as they've been building up their Konkret universe. And I've really enjoyed many of their books like Acolyte, The Watchman, and Absolver, and they have shown a lot of promise with books like Odina. And I really was excited when they sent me the link on Twitter to pick up their team book featuring Black heroines, Sister Circle X. Now, I always thought the whole concept of a black heroine in a solo book would do well, and I also thought the concept of a team book featuring strong sisters would sell very well. Now, there's a lot to like about the concept of Sister Circle X, but there's a lot of problems with this book as related to execution, because this concept is a very promising one. Unfortunately, there are problems with the execution on this comic that keep it from being as great as Acolyte, Absolver, and The Watchman, and the upcoming Tenoch God of Fire, which is looking like one of the best books of 2022. Now, Sister Circle X's concept problems start on the first page, and that's where we get in the inside cover exposition telling us about this team. That's a major mistake many creators make, is putting a paragraph on the inside cover. That's not where you want to sell your story, because that's the page that people don't see when they open a book. When people open a comic, it's opening from left to right, and on that right side, that's where people usually put an advertisement. They don't put an expository page explaining the characters and the premise. That means I don't know what's going on in this book because I'm looking to see what's going on that left-facing page, because that left-facing page is the first page I'm going to look at in the comic. Now, this first page on the left, this page is really passive, and I get that they're trying to build up the story of the origin of Sister Circle X, but you never want to open up a sequence passively on a first page if you're an indie publisher. If you're an indie publisher, you never want to open up passive. You always want to open up active. And the reason why you want to open up active is because you're competing with a lot of other indie creators. And if you come in with a very passive opening, you're going to come in weak. And if you come in weak, you're not going to be able to leave a strong first impression on the reader. Now, I get that they're trying to say that, oh, these police officers in the helicopter are watching the action from the background, but this does not bring us into the action to answer one of the critical questions a screenwriter has to answer, and that is, why should we care? We're not introduced to the main character or what they want, and we're not given a reason to come in and care on the second and third page. Now, this second page is very passive again. We're seeing a lot of people running away and people talking about the police. And then we get an introduction to some bad guys, but this is a very passive sequence with some really weak camera work. I mean, I really don't know what's really going on here. We get a close-up of one of the bad guys talking, and they're looking like they're having a confrontation with this group, with the hero, but it builds into a very weak splash, and the whole sequence really doesn't work, because the biggest problem with this whole sequence is we don't even know who we're talking to. When you're doing a superhero comic, we need to know what the main character's name is, because we need to know who they are. so we can know what they want to do and we can care about what they're doing. That's the major mistake here as related to this first 3 pages. And as I've always said in numerous videos, the first 3 to 5 pages are very important in a comic because these first 3 to 5 pages are the difference between you making a sale and you not making a sale. And in the first 3 pages, we get a confrontation where we really don't hear the hero's name and we don't really see her until we get to this splash. And then we get into this whole page, which is filled with a lot of dialogue, and it just talks too much. That's another major mistake a lot of writers make because they don't really sit there and read their panels aloud, and they don't really look at how this sequence is going to play out. Now, when I'm writing either an ISIS series book or even a comic like an East Dean No Good Deed, I will sit there and read things out because I know that the customer is not going to sit there and read all of this. And when they see this type of approach to storytelling, that's when they're going to turn away from this comic. Now, this is supposed to be the lead character as related to Sister Circle X, but she's coming across really passive, and they're trying to build this up into a story, but this execution doesn't work. It's supposed to be showing that she's having issues with her previous team that Odina is a part of, and she's waiting for them to come, and then she's going out here and then they're having a battle, but the battle, again, comes from a really passive sequence, and all of this is supposed to set up for this character, Layla, and her having issues with Odina's team, and then her leaving this team to join Sister Circle X. Now, I believe that if you wanted to build this kind of sequence up, you needed to do this in the pages of Odina, and if you wanted to create this team, you needed to show how your Layla was having friction with Odina and the team she was a part of. This was not really executed in the right way because this type of story needs time to build up, and this type of execution really rushed the concept because you really need to build stuff up over a course of time to get to that point, but they rushed this out, and that's why everything here comes across really passive and it doesn't really come across as active. So that's a real problem with this whole sequence as related to your Layla and her having her fallout with this team. Now, she has a fallout with the team and flies away. Then she runs into Mott, who tells her that wants her to be a part of the Sister Circle X. But this sequence comes at the halfway point of the book. And when we get to the halfway point of the book, it turns into an expository sequence about her and this team and everything, but we don't get to meet any of the fantastic heroes featured on the cover. That's another critical mistake here with Sister Circle X. I mean, you've got all of these fantastic characters on the cover, and we don't get to meet any of them until the last page of the book. That's a major mistake as related to storytelling here, and it looks like the writer is trying to use the Brian Michael Bendis approach to storytelling, and that Brian Michael Bendis approach to storytelling, that's not going to work in this era of indie comics. In an indie comic, you have to understand where people like me are paying $16 to get this book shipped to them. When we see the Bendis story model, that's not something we're really happy about, because at $16 a pop for these books, this is something that's not, I don't want to see dragged out over 6 or 7 issues, because that's looking like over $100 that I'm spending to get this story, and that feels like a bit of a ripoff when it comes to things. No, when you're doing an indie comic, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you go out here and give people the best story that they can have, and you don't want to use approaches like Brian Michael Bendis does, like stretching out stories over 6 or 7 issues. That's really going to make it where people aren't going to really be interested in buying your book, especially if you're an indie publisher, because if these books are costing $15, $16, that's not money I want to go out here and lose buying an indie comic when I'm getting next to no real payoffs as to things. Because again, at $16, I can use that money to have other higher entertainment value options. I mean, I can buy a month of HBO Max and get a whole bunch of shows. I can go out here and buy Amazon Prime. I can even go out here and go get some comic subscription services. And this is not giving me the entertainment value per dollar when you go out here and you use the Brian Michael Bendis model of going out here, making a book real passive, putting in a lot of expository sequences, and giving me this long, drawn-out storyline. No, when you're an indie comic publisher, you have one chance to make a first impression on the reader, and you have to make that first impression in that 32 pages of that comic you have in the reader's hands. That's something that I had to think about when I was putting together my second comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, and that's why I made the entire story fit into one volume. I know that I only have one shot at getting a positive impression on the reader, so that means I have to make sure that everything in that one volume sells that comic, and I have to make sure that everything in that comic is the best quality it can be. Now, I really, again, like the concept of Sister Circle X. I like the concept of a team of sisters coming together to take on these threats of these hybrids that came out of the pages of Odina. But like Odina, this book has serious issues as related to execution, and it is those issues as related to execution that keep this concept from being as great as it can be. There are some serious problems with the pacing of this story. There's some real serious problems with the setup of this story, and we really don't get much character development, and you can't have that when you're doing a first issue. A first issue really has to go out here and introduce us to the main character, the conflict that they're having, what they want to do, and make us care. And it also has to go out here and set up the premise of who this hero's main nemesis would be. That was another problem I had with Sister Circle X. This is all about forming the team over a couple of issues, but we really need to see what the enemy is, because it's the villain that's going to drive the conflict of the story. And you can't, and if we don't see that villain and see why this team has to come together in that first issue, we really don't care about it. I mean, this whole book, most of it should have been in a subplot of Odina, and we should have led to the main conflict of her meeting Mott in the first couple of pages and setting up the whole Sister Circle X team and introducing the bad guy. That's the way I would have done this whole concept. I would have built it up in the pages of Odina as Layla having issues with things, but Odina herself has the same attitude, so it would have come across as a little redundant. But the whole thing is, having the two of them butting heads would have made for some great heat, and it would have led to a great build-up to her being spun off, because that's how you go out here and set one character up, and that's what you do when you want to spin a character off. I know when I went out here and I was doing Temptation of John Haynes, and then I did Eaststeam No Good Deed, I made it where after Eaststeam had saved John Haynes, she was now in the world on the side of the angels, and she was learning about how to be more human, and she was also building that relationship with God, and that's what set up the story for Easting with No Good Deed. And then we later on further continue to explore Easting's story in Deadly Delilah, where I introduced Delilah, her main nemesis, after Easting took on those hood rats to showcase her powers. Then I created the Demons Anonymous storyline, which further explored Easting's rivalry with Delilah. Then I had Easting and Isis then showcase their relationship to contrast her relationship with Delilah. And then I brought in the rogue Morgan Le Fay in Fairy Tale. So when I was building the Easting character up, when I rebooted her, put her in John Haynes because she had came out of Isis. Then I further developed her character onward from there. So when I go here and I do heroines, I know that you have to build them up very slowly, and then while you're doing it, you have to establish relationships between the characters to really get people interested. Now, there's not really much character development in this book, and that was because of time constraints and page constraints. But that's all due to a big problem with the Odina books, which is page management. Page management in the Odina books has been one of the issues with Konkret as related to Odina. But when I look at Absolver and I look at Acolyte, I don't see the page management issues. I mean, when I look at Absolver, I look at Watchmen, I look at Acolyte, I even look at Tenoch, which is masterfully done. They really do a good job of page management, but this book didn't do a good job of page management because, again, look at how many pages are wasted here. This page, number 1, I don't really think we need it. This page, number 2, and we get this passive page. So we are, again, 4 pages into the book, which is in a 32-page book. That's about 25% of the book. And we're not really getting into any sort of action. And then when we get to meet the main character, she talks too much. You have to watch what you're doing when you're doing a comic because it's a visual medium, and you really have to watch going out here and having pages that talk like this. I mean, I talked about this when I was doing my review of the antagonist, and the people at the antagonist, thankfully, they came back to me on Twitter and said, we're going to fix this, and They learned from that mistake, but you don't want to do this type of Bendis-style dialogue. It really, really is irritating to deal with. You don't want your characters talking too much. Like a screenplay, you want them to say what moves the story forward and then move on. You don't want scenes that are too talky, and that's why I say you really need to read your book aloud, and you really need to go out here and take a critical look at your pages and really think about how your pages are coming together. That's something every comic writer has to do, and that's something I do all the time when I'm writing a script. I visualize how these pages are going to move because each page has to transition from sequence to sequence, and you don't want a lot of scenes where panels where people are just talking and have panels of talking heads. That really slows down your story, and it really doesn't help with your pacing, and it doesn't, get the action moving the way it's supposed to go. So I really like the whole concept of Sister Circle X. If we had gotten what was on the cover, this would have been another home run for Konkret Comics, but the execution here on Sister Circle X shows this brother that the whole Odina side of the Konkret universe still needs a lot of work, and there's a desperate need for an editor to help get these sisters' stories on the level of the brothers. I mean, I really think this concept is promising, and I'm hoping that they can do a little bit better with the storyline and the pacing in issue number 2, but this first issue didn't leave that much of a positive first impression on me. Sadly, I still enjoy a lot of Konkret Comics, and I urge everybody to go pick up some of their best books like Absolver, Acolyte, Tenoch, God of Fire. All of those books are absolutely fantastic. And The Watchmen, I'm still waiting for Watchmen number 2. But this one is one I could easily pass on because this first issue this one, it does not really do a good job of really getting you excited about what could be a promising concept. Now, my second comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is 31 of 32 pages complete, and I'm hoping to get that book up on Kickstarter soon. So once I get the last page and the cover from Antonio Balderi, I'll be able to launch that Kickstarter, and I'll be able to get that book to you readers hopefully soon. But until then, you can pick up my first comic, E-Steam No Good Deed, on Amazon.com for 99 cents, and you can see how I do heroines in E-Steam No Good Deed, and you can also pick up my prose books which feature black heroines like the ISIS series and the E-Steam series on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And if you want to see me do more comic review videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Coming to paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets from the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Pre-order your copy of ISIS Legacy on Amazon.com today.